Hello, everyone out there watching. My name is Chris Wiggum. I have the pleasure and honor of working at Pixar Animation Studios. And you are here today to hear a little bit about our new film, Soul, coming to Disney Plus on December 25th. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce the filmmakers behind Soul, director Pete Docter, co-director Kemp Powers, and producer Dana Murray. I should have mentioned, of course, also Kemp is one of the co-writers of Soul, along with Pete Docter and Mike Jones. Welcome, everybody. How are you guys doing?
Doing
So
well.
far, so good. It's good to be here.
Here we are talking with our friends in France. If you don't mind, let's jump right in.
Cool. Thanks, Chris.
Of course, Pete, I will start with you. What can you tell us about the origin of this new masterpiece? What inspired you to create it? This
Those are your words.
Unforgettable, it's emotionally charged, and of course, the animation is superb. Where did the idea come from, Pete?
Oh, thanks. The idea kind of came after Inside Out. You know, I've been a long time fan and passionate about animation. And after after Inside Out, I thought, boy, I don't know that it gets any better than this. You know, the film enjoyed great acclaim critically. The audiences loved it. Did great at the box office. And I just thought, well, now what do I do? I mean, in a weird way, it was a letdown because the film, like, it was such a pinnacle that I was thinking somehow my life would all fall into place and everything would be resolved. I don't know. It was absurd, but I think a lot of us have those ideas when we set these big goals. Someday I'm going to blank, you know, that it's going to make everything in our lives work out. And of course, it doesn't happen. And I think that story is reflected in the film. At the same time, I think my kids were growing up. This is the long answer. Sorry. My kids are growing up to the point where they're young adults, and it was causing me to look back at their lives going, you know, I think even when they were born, they had this sense of who they were. That you could tell, like when we brought them home from the hospital, that they had personality already. And I was kind of wondering, how did that happen? Where did that come from? And thought of a place that maybe formed those personalities. It gave us those attributes. Of course, we ended up calling it The Great Before. I think it was Lindsay Collins who came up with that name, by the way. Do you remember that? Anyway,
No.
The ideas of the film, I think those two elements kind of merged together in the idea is that are we sent to Earth with a purpose? Do we have something we're supposed to live out? Is there any meaning to life at all? Or are we meant to find it ourselves? And so those are all the elements, the ingredients that we dumped into the stew to make this movie.
Well, thank you, Pete. Thanks for asking those questions so that we can try to experience the answers and resolutions through your artwork. I think it helps us all a little bit. Kemp, turning to you. So you've also lent your writing skills to Star Trek Discovery, and of course your play, One Night in Miami, which has been adapted into a feature film, also releasing this year, directed by Regina King. Congratulations on that. But Soul is your first animated feature. How did you find working in animation? And can you talk a little bit about how you kind of shared duties with Pete coming on as the co-director?
Sure. I mean, animation was, while it was my first animated film, I got to say, like, being a longtime fan of Pixar films and a longtime fan of animation in general. I mean, the very first creative writing I did was actually independent comic books going back to college. For me, it felt like a natural fit. I think one of the biggest differences between live action and animation is just the collaborative nature of it, the sheer volume of people, you know, and in live action, screenwriting is a very lonely pursuit. You write the script by yourself, you do a couple of revisions, then you pass it off, and you hope that when the live version of it shows up on television or on screen, that you still recognize any of your writing, because it just goes off and you kind of are out of the process. Whereas in animation, the writing is something that is happening constantly. Honestly, I don't think we really kind of assembled our entire script together until the very end of the process, because we're working in sequences out of order. In terms of my co-directing duties, honestly, it was just kind of the best analogy I can think of is a co-pilot. When you hop on an airplane, the pilot sitting up there and the co-pilots sitting next to him or her, and I was pretty much just Pete's co-pilot. So pretty much every creative meeting, whether it was character design, sets, a lot of casting, edit, dailies, I'm there offering my opinion right alongside Pete's. So and in sometimes, and in some cases my opinion is very similar, and in other cases I think it's a differing opinion, and then we have a bit of a discussion about the which is the better way to go. So once again, it all speaks to that collaborative effort.
Well, thanks for helping steer that plane, and to continue with the plane metaphor. I'm glad that you had some creative collaboration that resulted in sort of discussion between yourselves on what might be right. I hope that doesn't happen for actual pilots when they're piloting planes. I hope that everybody is on the same page. Dana, question for you. You, of course, produced the wonderful short film Lou, which was nominated for an Oscar, but this is your first time producing a feature-length animated film. Tell us about your experience. What was it like, and how is it different producing a feature versus producing a short film?
I mean, producing a short film is a great entry way to learn so many things about producing. So I'm super grateful for that experience. But doing a feature is like that times 500 or something, because it's like you're producing one sequence for a short film, where this, I think we had like 40 sequences. Our crew, at one point is 350 people. So there's a lot coming at you every day. But, we have such amazing people at Pixar and support, not only from the executive level, but, through the entire ranks of our crew. People just work really hard. I think what was different about this film specifically is like, we had a shorter schedule, and also a lot of difficult elements. One of the most gratifying experience was the culture trust and the consultants and all of that, but also it added a layer of just more work, and also the music was different, so that was really exciting. It's just way bigger, I guess, but it was one of the best experiences I've had.
Well, congratulations, and we'll come back to the music in just a minute. But first, Pete, this is your fourth animated feature. Can you tell us about how your approach has changed from picture to picture, from Monsters Incorporated to Up to Inside Out, and now Soul?
Well, when I started on Monsters Inc., I had no idea what I'm doing. But that hasn't changed, actually. I still don't know what I'm doing. I kind of just jump in. Joe Ranft, who is our head of story on Toy Story, he equated the process to like being stuck in the mud in a car with 4 bald tires. And so the more you gun it, the more you just like sit there in the mud. And then you realize, wait a minute, one of these tires has a little bit of tread on it. So you put like all the sandbags over on that tire to then get you out of the mud. And I feel like filmmaking is a little like that, in that a lot of times you're just stuck until you find something that is grabbing hold. And sometimes that's the character. Sometimes it's a theme. Sometimes it's a feeling. In the case of this film, as I described, it was more of a kind of a feeling or a life situation. I wasn't really driven by the characters. Up was more, we knew who Carl was. We didn't know his story, but the character came first. And so every film is kind of different. And I think that's part of it, is trusting to the chaos of it and not coming in with a prescribed idea of here's how it works. Like, you just kind of got to let that go and commit to the idea that nobody knows what you're doing. You just got to go.
It's not true.
It's not true?
No, you know what you're doing.
I'm just saying, like, if I knew exactly how I could plot things out, it would feel a lot safer. It'd feel a lot, and especially with all the money and time that we're spending on these films, man, wouldn't it be great to have a script that we knew was like golden? And it just never happens.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like discovery is part of the process, the journey.
Absolutely.
So, hey, Kemp, New York City, you're from New York. Was New York the mandatory place where you had to set this film, or could you have set it in another city, for example?
Well, I think the only two places, considering how steeped it was in jazz, that were even really under consideration were New York and New Orleans. New Orleans is obviously the birthplace of jazz, but I think other animated films in recent years have kind of gone into New Orleans and kind of captured that. And in New York City is kind of like the proving ground. Some of the most iconic jazz clubs in America, hence some of the most iconic jazz clubs in the world, are all in New York City. So I think that it was really just one or the other. And to be honest, once you really think about the story you're trying to tell, New York kind of really pulled away in terms of a great location for Joe.
And speaking of jazz, Pete, how did you decide to bring jazz into the movie in the first place?
Well, it was initially just a kind of a cosmetic choice. By that I mean we were looking for something that would be fun to watch. Jazz does enjoy a long-standing connection with animation and affiliation. I think as soon as there were sound in animated films, jazz was a part of it. You look back at Betty Boop, and a lot of those early Disney films had jazz. So I think there is something about like the energy, the spirit of it that fits really well. But then as we learned more about it, we heard this Herbie Hancock quote or a story that probably some of our listeners may have heard, but I'll repeat it just in case. He told this story of playing with Miles Davis, the great Miles Davis, on a tour. I think they were in Europe, and he said, we were having a great tour, and this one particular concert was really especially wonderful until Herbie says he played this chord that was so wrong that he worried that he just reduced the whole night to rubble. And he said he looked over and Miles just took a breath, played some notes, and made his chord right. And he said, I couldn't figure out how he did that. It took me years to figure it out. And he says, what he did was he didn't judge what happened. He didn't say that's wrong or stop the concert. He just took it as something new that happened and did what any great jazz musician should try to do, which is take whatever happens and turn it into something of value. And I remember when we first heard that, I was like, that's exactly what we're trying to say with the story. This is thematically right on. The idea that we're improvising our way through life. We're not following a script. That's exactly what jazz is talking about. And, you're not playing the notes. You're making them up as you go. So it just felt like thematically, jazz had a lot to teach us about the story that we were telling.
And of course, you turned to the amazing musician Jon Batiste to help compose some of the jazz for the film. Dana, can you talk a little bit about that process? How did you find Jon in the first place, and then how did it work kind of once you brought him on board?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're all fans of the Colbert Show. I think one of our editors, Robert Graham Jones, had come to us and said Jon Batiste would be great, and we started looking into it and we agreed. And I remember we flew down to LA to meet him for the first time, and Pete kind of pitched through the story. And it was one of meeting Jon Batiste, it was just one of these great memories because Jon is so excited, and he was literally like, as Pete's pitching, is like, like screaming, like, woo, and Pete and I were just like, is he for real? And he was. That's how he is. And he ended up being such an amazing partner and collaborator, not only as a cultural consultant and educating like our crew on jazz culture, Black culture, history, but obviously he's just a genius as a musician. And it was great because we needed his performances to even animate those scenes with the music, and so we got a bunch of cameras in there and we're able to film all of it to hand off to the animators. And he's one of the great partners of the film.
And on the other side of the spectrum, musically, you also brought in Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross to work on the score, particularly for the scenes in the Great Before. Now, Pixar films have typically relied more on a traditional orchestral composition for their scores. how did you decide to work with Trent and Atticus and their sort of different approach to scoring films? Pete.
Well, I don't know that we really decided this, but we had heard that the way they like to work, they being Trent and Atticus, is that they'll provide sketches along the way. So, we'd be midway through. Just to back up again, as you say, typically like with Michael Giacchino or Randy Newman, we'll almost lock the picture, or at least parts of it, and then hand those off to the musicians to write music to go along with that picture, which is already locked. In this case, Trent and Atticus were giving us these little sketches of demos, and in some cases, I'm trying to remember, I think it was either 5 or 7 demos for like where Joe plays his life at the end. I think it was 5. They gave us 5 entirely different ideas. And they're like, hey, see if any of these work. So as we're crafting the scene, we're taking these bits of music, we're copying and pasting them, we're taking ideas that they had for this part of the film and putting them over here. It was very organic. It was a different way of working. Then, of course, they take it back and make it sound better than our clunky edits. But it was the music was really part of the storytelling in a way that we hadn't really been able to work before, and it was really pretty cool. The other thing I'll say about them is that they really seemed to connect with the film early on, thematically. Trent told a really cool story about that echoed exactly what we were trying to do with the film. That he said, I felt like once I played a stadium show, then I will really have made it and my life will fall into place. And he said the show played and he was backstage waiting for everybody. And then he said everybody went home and they all went back to their lives. And I was still the same guy, and I felt like, oh, this is going to work out really well. He understands emotionally what it is we're talking about in the movie. And that's always like the fundamentals when you're working with artists, is to make sure that they're connected to what it is that you're saying with the film.
Well, Soul is very much a film about life, but of course, in your exploration of life, you have to acknowledge, quite frankly, and explicitly, in fact, the notion of death. How did you approach that, Kemp, when working on the screenplay and producing the film, knowing that this was going to be seen by a lot of kids out there, and sometimes talking about death can be a complicated exercise with children?
Well, it's interesting that people keep coming around to it being about death, because we always saw this film as an exploration of life. The great beyond, whatever happens after you die, is basically in just like a couple of fleeting moments, and we don't even show what's going on there. We immediately kind of go into the world of before, the world of potential. But I mean, to answer that more specifically, though, I think children, one of the things I love about working for Pixar and writing on a Pixar film is that we don't talk down to children, and we don't try to dumb things down for children. Children actually already, they understand these complex ideas, and they have these questions already. They're going to have these questions whether we bring them up or not. And I think that, by not dumbing things down, and we're also working in a visual medium, so we're actually the kind of the perfect medium to deal with these kinds of issues in a way that is not really scary to children. But despite that, I mean, we understand there are concerns. We do actually do test screenings specifically for kids, just to confirm that we're not delusional, that we're not actually working on a piece of work that's going to terrify a whole generation. And it was really reassuring in the case of Soul that the couple of sequences that we worried, like, okay, is the combination of the sound and the music and the imagery going to be a little bit scary? Kids weren't even fazed at all. And in terms of the complexity of the story, afterwards we would have a conversation with the parents, and the parents would say, I really love this film, but I'm not sure if these ideas are too complex for my child, or if they're going to understand it, or if it's going to be disturbing, at which point the child would inevitably cut off the parent and explain in vivid detail everything the parent just said the kid wasn't going to be able to understand. So I think that Pixar gives children the credit I think they deserve. And I remember it's almost like we forgot other people have forgotten what it was like to be a child. And my childhood was filled with questions and wanting to explore all these ideas. And I think that this is a film that, yes, maybe slightly older kids, like a 2-year-old is going to be sitting there drooling, but our film, you know, a 2-year-old shouldn't be sitting in front of the television anyway. So I think that, you know, it's not really that much of a concern.
Well, thank you for trying not to instill great fear into a generation of kids. I'm still traumatized from when I saw Pinocchio as a child. I don't think I'll ever recover.
Oh, Watership Down. That was one of my first animated features. So, you know, rabbits murdering each other. So
I think we all have those scarifying memories. Yeah, it's part of, it's the ritual. You know, it's growing up. It's part of it.
yeah.
Going to something more specific about the movie, Dana, one of a couple of the characters you see, the counselors, you've got both the Jerrys and Terry, and their look is quite unique, quite interesting, very sort of graphic. How did you approach the character design for those characters? What was the inspiration behind the look of them?
Yeah, I think we looked at, you know, a lot of modernist sculpture and Picasso and some different artists, but I think it was Afton Corbin, who was one of our story artists, who had gotten the script, and the script hadn't really defined what the characters looked like at all. So she started drawing them just as these really cool, as you see in the film, like lion characters, and it was kind of intriguing. We're like, well, we've never seen that before, which was really exciting. And then she brought in to show one of our character artists, Deanna. I'm always going to say her name wrong.
Marzialese.
Marzialese. Okay, I'll
so.
butcher it, but anyway, she's
Sounds
fantastic. And she came in and she literally, like, she saw what Afton was drawing, and she's like, and she had never done wire sculpture, but she immediately was like, oh my gosh, I got to sculpt these in wire. So I don't know if she got coat hangers or what, but she just started playing with wire, sculpting these amazing characters, and brought them into an art review, and we were all kind of just blown away, because she turned the lights off and took her iPhone light and was moving the light around these wire sculptures, and just the shadows and the perspective that we were seeing and how they would change when she moved the light was really exciting. So we were like, oh, this will be the easiest character. Let's give this to the characters department and hand it off, and the animators will love this. They'll fly through these shots. It ended up being the most difficult character, the second most difficult character of Pixar at all time, right behind Hank, the octopus in Finding Dory. So, yeah.
And I think, just a shameless plug for Disney Plus, there's a series on Disney Plus called Inside Pixar. It's available now, and one of those episodes focuses specifically on Deanna Marzigliese and her approach. So check that out if you're interested.
Their name.
Shameless.
Pete, did you talk with or consult any religious, psychological, or even philosophical experts when you were conceiving of and then working on the film?
Yeah, we did. We brought in priests, rabbis, someone from Hindu tradition, Buddhism. We brought in a couple of shaman who had their drums and were going to take us on a journey. That was pretty interesting. Excuse me. And really what we were trying to learn from them, well, two things. One, at the beginning of the film making, there was a lot of concern that being given the subject matter, we might tread on some religious toes and beliefs and accidentally say something that would upset someone. So we were trying to avoid that, learn as much as we could. But also, we wanted to know what traditionally humans have considered that the soul, like what are the elements of the soul? So it would help us with the design and storytelling. And it was somewhat helpful in that, you know, I think most religions seem to agree that the soul is vaporous, it's invisible, ethereal, but that wasn't very helpful when it came time to design that, because that doesn't give me anything to grab onto. What we ended up doing was saying, okay, what if, I feel like the soul is a reduction, like an essence of who we are. I don't know about you. I don't feel like I'm just the meat that I am. I've obviously, my looks and hair and everything kind of contribute to that, but at the core of it, I kind of feel like we're more than that. And that's, I think, what the soul is. It's like the animating force and the essence of our personality and the seat of who we are. So we tried to follow that in designing the characters and the world. I will say that this is one of the more challenging design assignments I think we've ever faced at Pixar. And the way we solved it, Dana and Michael Fong and others created this bullpen where all the artists and technical folks would gather for hours at a time and iterate. And so, if you draw one of the souls, they look so simple that you're like, I don't think that's enough to hang my hat on. But we knew that the what the computer would bring would be such an essential part of the design that we needed to create this group where everybody would sit and sweat together in this room and iterate. So every week we'd come in and see the progress, and it was pretty astounding the stuff they were able to do, and the things we learned based on the experiment. So it was a lot of fun.
Well, that sounds great. Unfortunately, that's all the time we've got for this Q&A. Thank you everyone out there for watching. I think it's safe to say that all of the time and attention that you put into the film, from cultural consultants to philosophical and religious consultants to your own collective genius and that of your crew, it really shows in the film. It's beautiful, it's an achievement. Thank you so very much. For everyone watching, Soul will be available on Disney Plus from December 25th. Thank you.
Cool. We
Thanks for having us.
didn't get to ask Chris all of our questions.
I know.
We'll come back later for another one of these, and we'll do that.
Thank you all. Pete, Dana, Kemp,
Thanks.
appreciate it.
Cool.